learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm the host of this show, and also I'm a senior instructional designer, author, blogger, podcaster, instructor, and a whole bunch of other stuff. My passion, as you can probably guess, is instructional design. And the purpose of this show is to help you learn a little bit more about instructional design and also designing learning experiences. And of course, you can find out anything else you want to know more about this show over at drlukehobson.com. Before we get into our conversation with our amazing guest, I have an announcement to make. I have listened to you, I have heard you, and I have listened to your feedback, and you keep on saying, Luke, when are you launching the next run of a course about working with SMEs? And you know what? It's time. I think it's time we bring it back. So, hey, I am pleased to be able to say that the 9th cohort, can't believe we're in the 9th cohort of this, but somehow, in some way, the 9th cohort on the course on collaborating and building relationships with subject matter experts is returning. If you have not heard about this course before, it is a 2-week course on essentially how do you work with other people, which sounds kind of simple in nature, but when in reality, especially for what we do as instructional designers, it can be pretty challenging and it can actually be quite complicated. And by all means, I have made so many mistakes over my career, but I actually learned through failure, and I hope that you don't have to go through the same experience, about how do you exactly work with other people, and talking about best forms of strategies and overcoming barriers and challenges, and of course, learning more about your SME and making sure that they are going to be a part of this design and this building process with you. Because as any instructional designer will tell you, that the very best learning experiences are when the SME and the instructional designer, they form a partnership. There is an equal voice in the conversation. How do you make that happen? Well, I put together an entire course about literally how to do that for you. This course, it's 2 weeks. It is going to be a synchronous and asynchronous. It's essentially a blended learning type of a model of an online learning experience. Yes, everything is already inside of there from the asynchronous perspective, the videos, the activities, the assessments, the discussions, the everything else inside of there. At the same time, of course, I love being able to teach and to learn more and to nerd out with you. So obviously, need to be able to have a couple of different forms of workshops and talk about all of this amazingness as well. So this course is going to be starting up again this month at the end, October 30th. If you are interested and you want to be able to come and to nerd out and to learn more about how to work with SMEs, this course is for you. Whether you are an instructional designer and you want to be able to add another tool into your toolkit, or you're an aspiring instructional designer and you want to get ahead of a curve because you know for a fact it's going to be coming down, but you're going to have to work with other people. And how do you actually do this? So, hey, October 30th, course is launching once again. Go down below into the show notes and you will find the link over into the course. And by all means, if you have any questions, shoot me over an email, send me over a message on LinkedIn. Happy to help you out from there. So now let's talk about the amazing guest that we are going to be inviting on in momentarily with us. I am talking about the one and only Russell Sweep. You know him, you love him. I am sure you have heard about him before. If you have not, you absolutely positively need to check out the L&D Hot Seat podcast. It is an awesome show. Russell, by far, is one of the best interviewers I have ever listened to. I was fortunate enough to go on his show, and of course, we talked about SMEs, speaking about SMEs, and it was so much fun. It's an incredible show. You also might know Russell, too, from the GLDC Project Club, where they go over the e-learning heroes weekly challenges and dive on into different forms of projects and what people have been up to. What you might not know about Russell, though, and this is how him and I started to talk more about what could we talk about from this podcast episode, is that he is a new leader. Didn't envision himself leading people, and all of a sudden, he is now managing a team of instructional designers. And I have to say that Russell is not alone. There are many of us who thought about being an individual contributor for a long period of time, and all of a sudden now you're managing a team. what do you do? How do you react to this? What's currently going through someone's head as they transition from designer to leader? We break down all of these different types of topics. I share a whole lot more about myself too, as far as for becoming a first-time manager, those different types of emotions, and thinking about a whole bunch of different ways of how do you actually collaborate with people, and how do you try to be able to give some type of a physical presence to something that you can't see, because leading people, of course, it's all the people skills, it's the human skills, that it's different compared to being a designer. As a designer, you can say that the project is done. The training, the course, the program, the workshop, the whatever you're building, it's done. It's awesome. Here we go. And in this case, it's different. It's constantly moving and evolving, and new pieces are coming into play. So we break down what it's like to be a first-time manager, talk about those challenges, overcoming them, imposter syndrome, best strategies, leadership styles, and a whole lot more. You are going to absolutely love this episode, and I'm not going to delay this any longer. Here is the one and the only Russell Sweep. Russell, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Luke. Thanks for having me, man. I'm super excited to be here.
Of course, as I was on your podcast and now you're on my podcast. So this one's going to be kind of fun, man. I really can't wait to dive on into this. Before I get ahead of myself, though, can you just please introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a bit more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Russell, and I'm a content development manager for Goodwill in their organizational development team. So what that means is that I supervise a team and develop in-person and online trainings that support Goodwill's employees in either upskilling in their role or navigating a career pathway for their own advancement.
Awesome. I love it. Now, Russell, I know about your journey because you and I have been chatting about how long have I known you? Yeah, at least
a year, I'd imagine, right?
Yeah, so it feels like way longer. But through the power of LinkedIn and making instructional design friends nowadays, definitely feels a lot longer.
Sure.
So I've known you. At the same time, I don't know as much about your journey to how you now got to everything with Goodwill. I know you were in education before, and I know that you have done a variety of different things. But how did you actually make your way into instructional design, hearing about this, and now you're in L&D? What's your story, man? Tell us about your story.
I think you and I both have that in common, of having higher education be that stepping stone into this role. And I worked as an adjunct professor for several community colleges for about 6 years. And when my family decided to move from California to North Carolina, I started looking for very similar roles, but I very quickly realized there was just not as much support on the East Coast for teachers, and not even to mention things like unions. It was like I literally got laughed at in a job interview one time when I told them how much I was making as an adjunct on the West Coast, and they were all like, you would never make that over here. And I was all like, okay, red flag, that's an eye-opener for me. And I felt like I kind of had to make a shift for me and my family. So I fell into instructional design because I was doing research on what are like adjacent career shifts that I could make for teachers. And instantly I fell in love with the tools. I fell in love with the theories and the work. And I've always been a pretty creative person. Like I like to monkey around a little bit with audio and video and create some interesting things. So it really called out to me. So I hit the books, spent about 6 months learning everything I could, including your book.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then 6 months more of applying for jobs. And I wanted a full-time position because I wanted benefits. All I could snag at the beginning was contract positions. So I'd be doing a little bit here, a little bit there, working on parts of projects. And nothing against that. It gave me a good experience and gave me some good background, but I was really gunning for those full-time positions. And after a long time, I got really sick of applying for all these remote positions on LinkedIn that would get 300 applicants in the first 5 minutes. So I started looking locally, and I found Goodwill. Originally, I applied for a developer role within their organization, but the recruiter called me. They looked over my portfolio, and they're all like, hey, would you mind waiting a month and applying for this manager position that's coming out? And I was all like, oh man, it kind of sucks waiting another month for a job, but it was steady work. It met everything that I needed. And so it ended up working out. They hired me as their content development manager. And so now I oversee a team and we help develop and upskill our organization.
You know, it's interesting that Goodwill didn't have the same amount of traction about that. Like, Goodwill's huge.
Oh, totally. Totally. I think what helped is it was local. And I had been looking at a lot of remote position roles. This one did require, it was more of a hybrid, like some days in the office, a lot of days at home. And that really wasn't on my radar. But once I started becoming frustrated, like I started broadening my horizons, throwing that net out into the different pools. And this one really stuck. And I'm happy. Okay. I really enjoy it.
Oh, good, man. That's great to hear. So now that makes a little bit more sense about everything. And also for all the people who are listening at home, hey, there is hope. You can do this. Because, Russell, I hear about this from people, I don't know, at least like once a day about the market's too competitive. What are we doing? How do I break into this? But just like to highlight what you said for a second, you were clearly busting your butt trying to be able to do this. You had a portfolio. You were doing freelance work at the same time. And then it all kind of came together.
Right. I don't want to throw doom and gloom out there. That's not what I'm trying to do. I do agree that it is a competitive market right now. But I think, and I might be, I don't know if I'm the minority in this, but I think it's really the effort you put into your projects that will showcase and really demonstrate your value to other people. Like when that manager called me up and they're all like, hey, I know you applied for this, but I looked at your portfolio and you put a lot of effort into that. That shows me manager standards. That shows me like that you could rise to this level. Would you be willing to do this? I think that really spoke towards the amount of effort that I would be willing to put in a role, because I demonstrated it with something that I'm not getting paid for. But I think that if you are working on a portfolio, if you're working on some projects, just remember that it's going to live out there for a long time. Try and put your best foot forward.
That's good advice. I know right now it is tough, but there is hope. And I keep on hearing stories about that. And the latest podcast episode I just talked about, I also mentioned too about how it is so much more nowadays the intentional instructional designer. There's not so much so the accidental instructional designers, which was very common for a long time. But even then, just 2 days ago, someone reached out to me and they're like, hey, Luke, I fell in this job by accident. What do I do next? And I was like, how? How did you get
like, whatever. Unicorn.
Exactly. It was just like, I don't know anymore. There's always outliers for things. But I wanted to highlight that because it's so relevant for what people are currently going through. Yeah. I also think you are the first person ever, if I'm not mistaken, to reach out to me and be like, so Luke, I want to come on your podcast, but I want to talk about an extremely specific topic. And usually people are like, hey, if I want to come on the show, maybe we can talk about this thing or this thing. And like, there's usually options, but you were like, no, man, I got to talk to you about how I found myself in this leadership position and that wasn't the plan. Right. And now like here I am and I'm doing this. And I'd love to learn more about this because for people who think about their career paths in instructional design, like, you jumped. Like you went from ID to manager, which seemed like that kind of a thing. Like that's extremely amazing, obviously, and speaks to your abilities. But it also does serve as a reminder for people who want to be able to go from instructional designer to senior instructional designer or learning design manager or whatever the higher level title is going to be. Is that comes with just not being an individual contributor anymore. Usually the manager portion or the leader portion means now, but of course you have a team. And that's not talked about as much in this instructional design space. So as soon as you were saying, hey, can we talk about this? It's like, yes, I'd love to talk more about leadership. So tell me a bit more about as soon as you became this manager over for Goodwill, what was going through your mind about I'm an individual contributor and now all of a sudden I'm going to have a team? Like, what was your first initial reaction to everything when you heard about that from the recruiter?
Major imposter syndrome. I think that's an understatement. On top of learning ID responsibilities and how to speak corporatese, because I was transitioning from academia, I now had to learn how to be a manager and work over a team. So there were a lot of nights where I had to decide on foregoing my Nintendo Switch and instead hitting the books because there were so many roles and responsibilities that I now had to absorb. I also think that instructional designers nowadays, they take on more responsibilities and they're kind of expected to take on more responsibilities. You've got a lot of IDs who are going to be, they're graphic designers, they're video editors, they're doing the evaluation and data analysis. And there's kind of this expectation for someone to be in all these pockets. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that should be the case. But I think that if you are willing to learn a little bit more about all these different fields, you make yourself a more, desirable candidate. So it's never a bad thing to do that, I feel. Now, to be honest, I also really enjoy hot seat scenarios. I feel like my position is constantly evolving and I'm learning it as I go. So the organization, on top of the responsibilities, also wants me to teach leadership development to their senior leadership team. So I'm spending a lot of time learning everything I can about developing leaders and making the best possible curriculum that I can to guide new leaders into their position. It's a bit of a whirlwind.
So this is super meta.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's just like, okay, so now I'm a leader. Now I'm going to be teaching leaders how to lead and let me think about all these things in real time. I mean, like the good news is that you're going to have so many stories for the new leaders about this is what I went through. And like leave out the part that this was last month. But like, here's what I'm literally doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there's going to be a lot of me learning as I go. But I also think that instructional designers are used to that. We're used to the idea of, learning something new that we're not really familiar with and then translating it in a way that everyone can understand. We decode and decipher things so that we meet this minimum viable production so that everyone can learn it at the best possible way.
I mean, like that's essentially like our superpower is that we have to be able to essentially translate something that's super complex and then to be able to say, okay, now what does this actually mean? Let's put aside the jargon of a technical and kind of stuff, and it's to break it down.
Enhance. Click,
exactly.
click, enhance. Exactly.
Exactly. I like that. It's a little bit better for the phrasing for things. Was this a goal of yours to ever become a leader, period?
Nope. I didn't really plan on it at all. I think that making a career change from academia into a nonprofit corporate role was big enough for me. Everything else was pretty much a plus. I'm still kind of struggling with that question, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because I'm still learning how to do the best in my current role, and I don't really have that pathway for where I'm going to be climbing up that ladder.
Now, I hate that question. Like, I just genuinely, and I get it. I understand why that is a question because you want to think about long-term growth and blah, 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 and I understand. But especially in our field, it's so difficult to be able to predict. As you were just saying, we juggle everything. We always have things. I mean, like, I always say that we as designers, like, we thrive in chaos. Yeah. Because that's just, we're used to it. Like, we are like the flexible people. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that you have now had to learn how to be able to do this while also now managing and coaching other people and for everything. So you did not have a desire to become a leader. Yeah. Now you are. Yay. Congratulations.
I also think it's just like we change every 5 years. Like, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, right? I have different ambitions and different goals and different responsibilities. And it's kind of like, I don't know, if I looked at my haircut from 5 years ago, I think cringe would be the proper word there.
Yeah. We had to do a presentation at work the other day that are called mois. I'm not sure if you ever heard of these things before, like the French term like moi, meaning like, yourself. Oh. And it's essentially, it came to be that our team has grown so much over the last couple of years that we just don't really know as much as we should about each other, as opposed to if we saw each other in the traditional office space of seeing someone 5 days in a row and probably get to know more about them and everything like that. So my director was just like, well, what if we actually now do these presentations where you have to give a presentation about yourself? Talk about who you are. Talk about your background. Talk about a surprise. Talk about things you love. Talk about things that maybe not so fun. And, just share more about yourself and what makes you you. And it was so interesting to hear from some people who I sit next to, and then you come to find out that they were involved with rescuing dogs and helping out with dingoes in Australia. And you're like, what? What did you do? It was just like, what? Like, and of course, like, how would that ever come about in a normal conversation? It's so cool to be able to hear more about team members and digging into things. But it made me think about what you just said for your haircut, because, man, if you look at pictures of me when I was younger, I was like the full blown goth metal kid. So I had the long blonde hair, I had the spikes, the black nail polish, like that was me. And then now I'm like, okay, at 35.
I think Luke will be including that in the show notes. Picture of him in his goth days.
There's some pictures somewhere on the internet, and I found out that Heidi Kirby, friend of a show, both shows, is that she also was this like, I thrived in Hot Topic, and I was like, oh, okay, we're friends for a reason. Like, yeah,
I think there needs to be like a before picture of L&Ders, and then like, where are they now?
I love it.
That would be a fun LinkedIn post.
Oh man, I love it. Okay, well, mental note for us to be able to do to just start up this thing afterwards.
Sure.
But okay, so let's getting bored back on this track with leadership and everything. I guess my next question is, how are you finding it so far? This is new for you. Genuinely, I'm just curious. How are you finding it being a leader?
It can be challenging at times. Like I started contract work, and there was kind of this reliance on me doing everything, right? Like the work had to get done because I was the point person. So having a team and which I can work alongside with, and I can delegate tasks, it's been an adjustment. I still find myself sometimes doing a huge portion of a job before realizing that I can bring others into it. And so there's a bit of a mindset change. I feel like when you're a solitary worker, you kind of shine through your work and your achievements. But when you're a manager, it's all about how the team functions and how they work. And so it's kind of like the rising tide will lift all boats mentality.
Absolutely. And you came into a role that already had an existing team, right?
Yeah, exactly. We kind of allocated what those responsibilities would look like. And it is ever evolving, because not only is it a new team, but it's new for the entire organization. So we just received a new CEO that was pushing this idea of learning as a culture, and wanted to encourage that and develop this team so that we could start training the entire organization. So I think everyone is trying to figure out, like, how do we do this to the best of our ability?
That makes sense. But I was just thinking about it from your perspective, that not only are you going into this with being new, I mean, you're trying to be able to develop a new skill set, but then also you need to learn about all these people at once. You know, where for someone who comes into this, and let's say like they build a team from the ground up where they're the origin, and then they get to add new people and be able to, like, it's like when a coach joins an NFL team and you see that they fire everybody because they're like, well, I need to build my culture. So then they bring in their people and their players, kind of a thing.
Or like a heist movie when you're selecting like the team, like, oh, I got the getaway driver. Like I got the person who's the talker. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But for you, your heist was your team was already there.
Oh yeah. The heist is already finished.
It's already done. Yeah. So now you have to learn those people and then figure out their skill sets and their wants and their needs and their goals, and then trying to be able to support that.
A lot of them have already been on the team for about a year. So there was already relationships, there was already communication that developed. And so there were challenges related towards like being a new leader.
So speaking about that for challenges, did you find it difficult to be able to, like, what's the way of trying to be able to phrase it, to incorporate in your day as far as for carving out time to go and assist people in this nature, but it doesn't really account for your job in a way? So that was something I found as a first-time manager, where I was just like, I'm spending so much time working with these people, listening to them, coaching them, walking them through things. But then at the end of a call, I don't have a thing to then be able to say that, like, here's my product, here's my artifact, it's just like, it worked, it did well, but I don't have something to really go and like look at. It's just weird.
Yeah,
It's
no,
weird to
no.
think about.
That reminds me, like a big portion of what I learned was how to communicate to people in the way that I like to do work, and also take into consideration how they like to do work. So a lot of times those social calls are really good for morale and really good for the team, and they need it, and that makes sense. I'm a pretty driven person that likes challenges and overcoming puzzles, and I feel like you might relate to that too, Luke.
100%.
But I had to learn pretty quickly that not everyone thinks that way. And it could also be that some people could interpret the way that I'm acting as being kind of contrary to them. So, one of the things that our organization started doing was we rolled out something called the DISC assessment. And it's kind of like a personality inventory on how you work with other people. So there are like 4 different profiles. You got dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And a lot of people can fall within multiple different ones anywhere on the spectrum, but it really figures out how you communicate with others. And my favorite thing about it is it also tells you how people interpret your communication to them. So, for instance, I like to move pretty fast and I'm a pretty blunt person. So, someone who is like an S for steadiness might perceive me as rushing them. Someone who's a C for conscientious might want to slow down and make sure that everything makes sense and I'm not making mistakes. And then someone who's like an I for influence might even perceive me as like being stern or upset with them. So understanding that, I feel like there's a lot of room for miscommunication and assumptions to happen there. So a big challenge for me was learning, how do people communicate? How do they prefer to communicate? How do they like receiving feedback? And really tailoring my listening skills to support the way that they like to function.
Now, take a guess about which ones I am. I've done the disc assessment before. I'm 2.
Yep. I would say
2.
big D energy.
That's 1.
Yep. Are you a DC?
I'm not.
Okay.
So this is what made me laugh is that I am an ID.
Oh.
I was just like, okay, let's talk about play on words there,
Wow.
about being instructional designer, but also I am 1,000% down the middle of an I and a D.
That's
And-
hilarious.
Right. I was just like, what are the chances about that? But the thing that I found extremely interesting learning more about myself, and as you were mentioning, communicating and working with others, is that I work the best with people who are the opposite of me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everyone on my team, which is funny enough, is like an S and a C.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, interesting.
You're not alone. I've found the exact same thing. And I think that you help balance each other out and keep each other like conscientious of like how people work within the organization. And you wouldn't want everyone that is in like a echo chamber to all just constantly agree with each other. It's good to have that pushback. It's just about mitigating it to make sure it doesn't become into conflict. Like having disagreements or having opportunity to discuss like alternative viewpoints is good for growth. And you want that. So having all these styles, I feel like it just helps the department grow as a whole.
Absolutely. And not to mention, too, if you're tackling like a complex problem, you don't want people who all think exactly alike trying to be able to solve the problem, which is what I've found is that I am great at bigger picture thinking for things. So I'm the ideas guy. No problem. All day, every day. I'll churn out ideas. But when it comes to getting down to like the nitty gritty details and making sure to close every loop and then to think about all different possibilities and the tiny, tiny details, not the best. And it's really hard for me to do that. So when my team members are like, well, that's where we're great. I'm like, oh, thank you. Like that's how we collaborate together. So it's interesting. So what are you? Then
I'm a D, straight up D.
You're just deep.
Yeah. So I like challenges. I like to overcome things. I like to solve puzzles and then move on. One of the things that my wife constantly tells me is she's all like, you need to slow down and like, just like you have achievements, celebrate those. Like take some time to reflect. And that's difficult because when I finish one project, I'm all like, all right, what's next? Let's jump on to the next one. Let's check off that box. And it's kind of like, so what we've started doing, we learned this, we went on our honeymoon about 2 years ago and we were in Italy and we got hooked on some Prosecco over there and we're all like, oh, this is great. So when we came back, we take little Prosecco breaks when we have an achievement or something to celebrate where we just stop, open up a bottle and we just pour ourselves a glass and we just talk about what we did. And it's a great way to feel grounded and in the moment, and also kind of like share something with your partner about your achievements.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. That's just a good reminder for literally everyone listening to celebrate your achievements and those wins, no matter how small.
It's tough, man. We live in like a hustle culture, and I feel like online social media constantly encourages us to go, go, go. It's tough sometimes to turn it off and just reflect and know that you did a good job, because I feel like everyone does. We all do good jobs. We just need to reflect it. And we're also teachers at heart. I feel like teachers are the hardest ones to admit that they're doing good stuff, because they want to support and they want to like celebrate other people's achievements. We need to learn to celebrate our own as well, and to be comfortable in that space.
Absolutely. We all do. It's a page that we can all take out of that book to be able to really try to do that, because that's the whole different thing that we all definitely need to be able to work on.
It's a skill.
It's a skill. It's a skill, but I'm not good at it either. I just fly, and I was just like, I mean, I have a to-do list that's behind me that you can't see, and there was 2 that were on the to-do list for months, and I finally finished them. And the celebration I had was just taking my dry erase marker and being like, woo, and then like erasing it and like on to the next thing. And it's like, I've thought about that, was it's like, no, like, hold on a second, man. Like, that was on your to-do list for months, and it's finally gone. Like, now you can, so. But
Not gonna lie, I enjoy striking through things that I've accomplished as well. There's a small endorphin burst when that happens.
Yeah, exactly. You need to give it that physical manifestation to be able to say, here is this. So whether it's I know some people use sticky notes, so they write down a thing of a sticky note, and then when they are going, like, and they slam it down to go through for the stack, and then they can actually visually see the stack of how many things they've accomplished.
Oh yeah,
and that's their win. It's just like, that's so smart. Need to be able to do that, and to kill more trees with buying 1,000 sticky notes. It's great. Russell, you mentioned about challenges, and we were talking a little bit about them for the new leaders out there, because I'm sure there are, for people who are listening to this right now. What was your biggest challenge so far, and how did you overcome it as a new leader?
Yeah, I think that listening to people and understanding how I communicate, like we talked about with DISC, I think that was a big one. It was just kind of like, sometimes I needed to learn when I start meetings, like, hey, let's talk about pleasantries. Let's start off strong with like what people aren't doing, so we can take ourselves out of this anxiety mode, and let's set a good culture and a good standard for what the day is going to look like. And then also finishing up with like, all right, so these are the tasks that we're going to be accomplishing, some sort of call to action, so that we can get something out. Like you had mentioned, sometimes we have these meetings and we feel like, what did we even achieve here? We were here for 45 minutes, right? What was this about? So having something that you can say, all right, this was the point of this meeting, this is what we're getting out of it, and these are the next steps. That's something that really helps kind of move forward in things, because we all have so many responsibilities and so many projects. They fall between the cracks, and having something that kind of remind you and be like, okay, this is the next step. This is where I'm moving, and have that kind of support system, I feel like has been a game changer throughout my entire experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For your calls, when you do one-on-ones and such, do you have a type of essentially like a running list of a doc where you have the date, the agenda, and then you just move on to the next week, and then you can all write down exactly what you want to be able to talk about, but you can look back to what you just talked about last week to make sure?
It's funny. I feel like everyone on my team has some sort of example like that. Like, one person likes the whiteboard. I might like, I don't know, Trello or some online project management. Someone else does like sticky notes, like you said. So we all have our own system, and that's perfectly fine. As long as it works and as long as we can coordinate, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think a really good option might be the follow-up email, and just be like, hey team, like, this is what we covered. Here's the call to actions. Here's the responsibilities. And just like, that's something that everyone has access to. It lives somewhere, and they can sync it up with their calendar very easily.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I wish I did that when I first started, where it was kind of more, there wasn't so much of a structure that I had in place. And then now, as I've grown as a person, where I'm like, oh yeah, as you were talking about, like not everyone's style works the same way, perceives the same way that you do, where I'm very much so of like, oh, you want to talk at 4 a.m.? You got it. I don't care. But then for other people, they're like, can we please have a weekly one-on-one every week at the same time? I was like, yes, we should do that. That's how normal humans think. I'm like, yes.
You know what, Luke? I totally believe that you are taking meetings at 4 a.m. I absolutely believe that.
I am awake at very, very early. So it's just like, sure. Which, when I worked with some people who are in completely different countries and time zones, it's sometimes it works. So
you got to do it,
but it's not good for you. Don't do that, please. Oh my God, I'm weird. Just don't do that. But for that, I wish I did that more, because then when I had to do performance evaluations for the first time, then I had some form of documentation where before I didn't, and I would essentially just like lock myself in a room and just did like some form of a meditation to be like, what was everything that we did for the last year? Okay. Yeah. And then you have the running tally inside of your head. And for some reason, it just kind of escaped me to be like, and I'm not sure if you have this, where as an instructional designer, you're methodical, you're organized, you have everything perfectly laid out. But then when it comes to learning a new skill, and then now something like with communication and with people and everything, you still need to do those things. Yeah. It's just in a very different way. And it took me a while to adjust to that.
Dude, preaching to the choir, man. My background is in psychology and like behaviorism, and I cannot get my dog to not hump other dogs at the park. So, I mean, at a certain point, it's just, you got the blinders on. It's difficult to do it in your own life, Sometimes you just got to like hire out or like admit those weaknesses. I know I have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I've one of the things, and we were talking about this before, we were talking about masterminds before the podcast episode and why they're so useful. I just started talking with other managers where I was just like, how do you do this? Give me your perspective, much like how you and I are doing right now, where it's something at work where I'm like, hey, you also know about the culture and what we do and yada, yada, yada. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? I've learned a lot from that, because
that's so good. I mean, like, it's kind of the benefit of creating a community also, because you can throw out this question and you get so many different perspectives from it. One of the reasons that I started a podcast was that I could get this, like, I don't know, kind of like improv, like mentorship opportunity. And I could ask people who were really smart to answer my questions. And it's honestly, it's just been a game changer, being able to like really talk with people and bounce ideas back and forth. And I feel like you grow so much stronger as a person.
Absolutely. And you don't know about people's leadership styles either, which is something that I found to be very interesting, because you know them as an individual. Mm-hmm. So like, I know you, Russell, the person, but as soon as I work on your team, I'm sure that you have your own different types of traits and characteristics that you do that no one would ever see except for those reporting directly to you. Yeah. And I found that interesting, because when I started to ask other managers about how would you tackle this, what would you do, they would give some suggestions where I'm listening to them and I'm like, wow, like, you're kind of a different person, and not in a bad way. Like, you have this much more, now we're not speaking so casually. Now you have this more like professional tone and trying to be able to do things where it's like that flip of the switch. You're like, that's very impressive. I will take notes.
Absolutely.
I'm going to try this.
Absolutely. Like, I had a boss one time that really gave me some awesome advice. They said that a manager is both a sword and a shield. They advocate and fight for the needs of their team, and they get them the things that they need, like resources or developmental opportunities, but they also support and defend their team when things don't go well. Like, they kind of take the heat for blunders that happen. And I like to think that you can learn a lot about a person by how they handle hardships. That's kind of like, I don't know, are they going to point fingers at someone? Are they going to lash out against someone else? Or are they going to have good composure and a desire to learn from their mistakes? Because, like, we're all going to stumble. We're all going to make mistakes. It's part of the process of learning, right? And growing. And so when a team makes mistakes, I often view that as a way of them pushing their boundaries, learning something new. And then I like to encourage that energy, that hunger. So we're constantly introducing new things, new software, new theories, new concepts, because I want them to get something out of that. And they love growing because of that.
That's awesome. But such a great piece of advice, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Well, your boss gave, that's
no, he was an amazing manager. Like I've actually considered maybe bringing him on my podcast because I was just kind of like, this would be fun just to reconnect, you know?
Yeah, I know. And what's funny too is that one of my former bosses also gave me a sword reference, which now I'm like, is there something to swords that maybe we need to think more about? But anyway, and how this, now people will think that I'm not crazy as I explained about this, is that there was one time when he did not do anything wrong, but he was taking the blame for it. And he was like, you know what, Luke, sometimes pick your battles. This time I'm going to fall on the sword.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, but why? Like, it's not, he's just like, trust me. I know this person is like, I know what's about to happen. This is going to come up again. And it's like, nope, we're not doing this. In order to get past this and to make everyone all happy in that kumbaya moment, I'm just going to take the blame. Yeah. And I remember at first, and of course I was new to the team and everything. And like, and this was my boss. It was like awesome and great. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, and he's like, mm-mm. And sure enough, a couple months later where something happened, and they were able to then move past that and then to be able to successfully go and to do this different initiative. I mean, all because of the fact that they buried the hatchet. Another weapon reference for some reason. They buried the hatchet and they were able to move on. So it's interesting to learn about.
I don't know. I think that there's definitely something there about a leader protecting their team in one way or another. And also, it kind of goes back to that idea that when you're solo, when you're like a contractor, everything's on you. Like your work is what reflects it. But if you are a manager, it is your team's functionality. It's their cohesion. It's how they get things done. And that reflects as you being a manager. So really, you need to strive to encourage and develop that.
Absolutely. Do you find yourself gravitating towards one leadership style over another?
I don't think so. I do like to get my hands dirty. I think that that's just a byproduct of me being a contractor. Like I want to do stuff. So like I will often get involved alongside with them. I gotta be honest, I still struggle with delegation. That's something that sure. I've really tried to work on, but it's so difficult sometimes because like I want to explain the why and I want to explain like this whole process and my whole thinking about something. And so sometimes you just got to be like, all right, this is your responsibility. This is your responsibility. Let's go. And that's one thing that I've really struggled with. Absolutely.
I can 1000% relate to that. I also want to solve every problem.
Right. Yeah.
Where they need to learn. And almost just like, no, here's what you do. Here's the steps. Let me walk you through it. Let me draw you a diagram. And I want to like and it's like, no, they need to learn. They have to experience it. It's so hard.
There's also like, I know that I'm pretty new to instructional design, but a lot of my team members came from different positions where they were like either HR or they were like they facilitated in-person trainings. They didn't have as much experience with like adult learning theories or like the development for like a corporate position. And so a lot of times they will look to me and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, is this the best option? And there is a chance there to kind of encourage growth and encourage development and education. A lot of times that kind of nagging contractor voice in my head is all like, just do it yourself, Russell. Just go forward, just do it, get it done. It'll be so much faster. It'll be fine. But that's also going back to those communication styles. That's a very D mentality, a very dominating thing. You have to encourage growth. You have to give people opportunities because then they also have a lot of pride in their work and you want to foster that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's also interesting. It's so interesting from a people skills perspective, the human skills perspective of trying to be able to help people to grow. And then of course, once they do and they hit that pinnacle and they reach that new milestone, then you feel all warm and fuzzy and amazing inside.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like, look at that. You know?
I imagine it's very similar to kind of like, I don't know, a parent who's just kind of wants to see someone grow and they want to do it for them. And they want to guide them throughout this. And I just feel like if you got to let people learn, you got to let people grow, and they will develop their own sense of like what they feel prideful for, what they enjoy in their work. And like they will show you that they can step up and get it done.
Right. How do you go about with leading a team of designers where you are relatively new to design in a sense?
Yeah.
How'd you get around that or handle it? I should say.
Well, to be honest, I have dabbled a lot with like editing when it comes to like audio and video. And I did teach for about 6 years, so I knew how to develop curriculum. I think the biggest things were probably integrating in like, how do you look at data? How do you look at evaluation? How do you support the business needs and the ROI? These were all new things that I had to learn. And how do I translate my skills to help support what the business needs? So like you, like I leaned my first several months, I leaned on other managers. I leaned on other people in the the senior development team or like the executive team in order to teach me, what does Goodwill stand for? What is their purpose? Why do they do what they do? And how do we best support that? And I think that a lot of companies, they understand the why, they just need to show it. They need to have something to help support it and show others. And so I saw a need in that. And so right now, a big initiative that we're pushing is collecting the data from all these existing trainings and seeing if they support a lot of what Goodwill's needs are. What is the goal and how are we supporting it? So there is a little bit of sense of like backstepping that's happening, but I feel like it's moving in a really good direction.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to be able to do. And I'm sure you're going to find some really interesting results, by the way. That's a super fun part.
I gotta be honest, dude. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah. It's really fun to be able to see, like, is everything aligned? And what do we do next? If it's not, how do we fix everything? How do we be able to ski? So, yeah, it's awesome. Well, Russell, I'm going to change gears completely now that we've talked a whole heck of a lot about leadership because of how you also are known, in my opinion, for two things on the internet. And I want to dive on it a little bit deeper for that one. The first is your fantastic podcast called the L&D Hot Seat. If the people who are listening right now have not listened to this, you must. I'm currently playing as the interviewer, but Russell, you are an amazing interviewer. I said it when I came on your show. I was just like, this is one of the best podcast episodes I've ever done because of your questions, your style. So now I'm trying to be able to make you really like me so you come back for more episodes.
Yeah,
so
I'll slip the 20 underneath the desk after we're done.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. But that episode, so actually that podcast though, when you were producing episodes and you started to release some of the snippets and you were doing those little like shorts and trying to be able to do those teasers for everything, I was watching all of them. I probably listened to every single one. And the entire time I was like, I really want to go on this podcast. It's different. It seems interesting, but I had to play it cool. I was like, I can't message him because of course he's going to think I'm desperate. I'm like,
you can't be too eager.
Nope, can't do it. So I was waiting, and then finally you messaged me, and I was just like, yes, I want to go on your show. I mean, yeah, it's cool. I'll go on your podcast. Yeah. So, but the podcast is really cool, man. All that aside, it's different, putting people inside of the hot seat, asking extremely difficult questions to be able for them to answer. Where did this idea come from, and how did you actually work up the courage to ask some of these people some really thought-provoking questions?
That's a great question because you are right. A lot of, especially the fact that I'm pretty new to L&D, like how do I have the gusto to ask these questions of experts, right? But honestly, I feel like that's what most people want to hear. Like the L&D Hot Seat, it's a show that presents 3 challenging scenarios in the field of learning and development, and the guest and I try and come up with a solution together. So some people have compared it to like a recruiter asking questions like, tell me a time when you were like ...
I can see that. Yeah.
That's so useful, right? Because it paints this story, this picture. And my hope was to present these nightmare scenarios to the audience so that if they find themselves in similar situations, they already have some solutions in mind. So like some of the most common things that we all run across are like your boss is all like, hey, I want you to find a new learning management system. And you're just kind of like, oh crap, I don't know anything about LMSs. Or if you've got like to advocate for your learners when the stakeholder is pushing like PowerPoints and a voiceover, those are difficult scenarios to be in. And so when we find ourselves in them, I really hope that a lot of us can listen to these experts and we can draw from that inspiration so that we can come up with our own solutions.
I love it. I mean, once again, when I listened to every episode, I was just like, these are fascinating. Because as you said, they're different. It's not the typical type of interview question where it's, trying to be able to like, tell me about yourself and how did you do the thing that you're known for? It's just like, because I know that we were talking about things with SMEs. We were talking about like, here's this technical problem. What are you going to do? How do you work with this person? It's like, hey, that's a great question that people struggle with.
One of the things I really loved about your episode was you really do promote this idea of interviewing and getting to know your SME before even asking them questions. And that's so important because we should remind ourselves that we're dealing with people. And that's one of those aspects of the job that they don't really train you in a lot. They're all like, oh, you need the learning objective. You need to get this, check off that. And it's kind of like, hey, these people have lives and they've got their own responsibilities. Oftentimes subject matter experts have their own job that they have to do and they were just thrusted into this position. There's not a lot of professional subject matter experts. You're oftentimes just drawing from like someone in the company, right? So you're taking them away from their responsibilities. And when you brought that up, I was all like, that's gold. That is so good. Like when we're talking about those snippets of like cutting it up to do a little like promo, I think I actually included that as your promo because I'm all like, hitting the point right there.
Yeah, I think so. And thank you. Your $20 bill will also be in the mail. So I'm talking about
even.
that. But I've been in so many meetings where people just dive right into being like, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm so-and-so. Cool. Let's talk about backward design. Yeah. And I'm sitting there being like, can we, because at that point in time, it's awkward to be like, I know we've been talking about backward design for 5 minutes, but like we need to push pause. Like I barely know this person's last name. What are we doing? It's so tricky. And of course, and that's how I was trained. By the way, like I was trained about like, hey, you walk in, backward design, learning objectives, the outline. And it's like important, but also I found that it was so tough to then be able to work with people because they're like, who the heck are you? What are you doing? What's instructional design? And it's
Dude, like, there's always that question when you talk to recruiters, like, tell me a difficult SME that you worked with, right? And so we have this mentality of like, oh, I need to get my stuff done, and this SME needs to provide it for me. And if they don't do it according to my schedule, then they're difficult. Like, it already sets up this like toxic mentality when you were like, hey, take a breath, talk as a person. Get to know that person, maybe even look into their schedules to see if it works with your schedule, so that you can coordinate. Like I was all like, you know what? We need to teach more people skills in this role.
1,000%. It is. I mean, I'd argue that our job is people skills. Yes. Majority is people skills. And then of course you throw on the learning science and the tech and the research and everything else. But for the majority, you're working with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's really what we do. So it's been interesting. Okay, so besides the tip that you just shared, that was the tip that I shared. What has been your favorite tip so far from a guest on your podcast?
Let's see. I feel like all of the guests are absolutely incredibly smart and fantastic, and I recommend all of them, to be honest, because like I love talking to smart people who are saying smart things, and it always comes out because, like you said, like these are situations in which people have to learn as they go, and they have to adapt and be flexible. And I feel like that's when ingenuity and creativity comes up. That's when it like bubbles to the surface. So amazing responses from everyone. I did just recently record a DEIB episode in which I asked them, how do you let learners know that an accessible course was built with them in mind? And Yvonne, who was my guest, she compared diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to a pyramid, saying that diversity is really like that lowest section and that it's about representation. It's a standard that we all should have. But really, belonging is the top of that pyramid. That's what we should strive for. And when you use something like universal design, you're building it so that it becomes the standard for everything. So it's not an afterthought. It's not that we're telling people, hey, I included closed captioning because you might have difficulty hearing. No, you include closed captioning in everything, and it becomes the standard. So people don't feel like they're an afterthought. They feel like they belong. And when she said that, like, I'm pretty good at coming up with follow-up questions, Luke, like on the fly. There were several seconds of silence, and I was just like, whoa, mic drop.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so good.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and that's a huge. We don't do enough. Let me quite frank. We literally do not do enough in regards to all those things that you just mentioned about. So I love that. Well, I will make sure to link that episode in the show notes so people can go.
Absolutely. And it's also just like, I feel like we're pretty good. We're becoming better advocates because we are understanding how to develop courses for different ably bodied people. But it's also about like introducing that into the culture too, introducing that so that becomes a standard. And I feel like we could take that step. I don't know. It gave me goosebumps hearing her say it. And I was just kind of like, wow, this is like key. This is great advice.
It makes so much sense. I was reading an article the other day that actually described one of my behavioral patterns, and I didn't realize that I really did this until I was reading this and was just like, oh, I fall into this camp. So apparently, for those who are Gen Z / getting more towards the millennial side as well, when they are scrolling mindlessly on all the different apps, they don't use sound. And instead, they rely on the fact that you just assume that someone is going to have the words appear on the video. That is your natural assumption. And if you don't have that, then statistically, it's more likely for someone to say, oh, there's no words. I don't know what they're saying. And they go to the next thing. And it's like 70% of the surveyed people.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time. I am always, when I'm on Instagram or anything else, I don't use sound.
Yeah.
And it drives my wife nuts. So she's like, why don't you? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why. I picked up that habit.
I do it when I watch movies also. Like, I always have closed captioning on. And like, I don't know if it's the fact that music in movies just has such a bombastic score. Sometimes it's difficult to hear dialogue, but it's become second nature to have closed captioning in everything that I'm watching. And it's just kind of like, if I don't have it, I'm all like, whoa, weird. I need something.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you pick that up, and then after that, it's like, if it's not there, then you can't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because now that's now your thing. And same thing with mine for mindlessly doom scrolling. And I'm like, wait a second, like I can't see it. So, and I thought about that too afterwards with my own videos, because I realized for some of the videos that I created previously, I did not have there was closed captioning, but it wasn't visually appealing to have the words actually beside me as I'm talking. So now for my new shorts, like, you notice that the words are appearing next to me as I'm speaking.
Yeah.
And that was that epiphany. It was like, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
A note for future self.
Right? It was just like, I need to do that. And it's interesting because some apps that's native and then other apps it's not. And that really threw me off. So YouTube Shorts, that's not a native thing. It's like, okay. Oh, so Instagram, it does that though. So the way to getting around that is to create the video first in one version and then you upload it into the other.
Oh, so I got you.
So of course it takes way more time, which is always going back to the whole thing, talking about this, relating it back to UDL, is that we should always be doing these things. But then you hear from people about, it takes too much time, it's too much money, it's too much whatever. It's just like, but the quality it dies. Like, you got to focus on the quality or else.
So that's actually the second question that I asked Yvonne also, because I was super curious about that too. Listen to the episode if you get a chance, because she has an amazing response about when, push comes to shove, you're down to the wire and people are saying, you know what, like I'll push this accessibility thing because I need to give a deliverable. How do you back up that standard? How do you secure it so that it is important for everyone?
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to listen. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, the other thing, Russell, that I have to ask you about is the GLDC Project Club, which I have not been able to attend yet because I always have a meeting during that time frame.
Oh, yeah.
And I see you post it all the time. And for those who don't know what GLDC stands for, it's Global Learning and Development Community. Said that right? Okay, thank you.
Nice.
Tell us more about what that's all about.
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I reached out to the people who put on the Global Learning and Development Community. It's a free online community to help out people who are transitioning into their career, or if they want to network and build a community with other people who are instructional designers or in the L&D format. So I reached out to Mariana and Linnea. They're the ones who put this on, and I was all like, "Hey, I like to build things. Like, can I do something for this? Can I do like an offshoot of this?" And they're all like, "Yeah, totally. Thursday, it's yours." And I was all like, "Okay, cool." Like, they were super generous about that. So I started Project Club, which it follows the e-learning heroes weekly challenges that Articulate puts on. So Articulate, they are the ones who they have got Storyline and Rise under their catalog. They also have a community of people who develop a lot of these things, a lot of these projects, and they build a challenge every single week. So what I've done is I curate all these different projects, and I have a community that gets together every week, and we start off with a communication, a little bit of dialogue on like, what is this prompt? What is this challenge? What do we know about it? And then I showcase these. We go through them one by one, and we look at all these projects, and we talk about what did they do that was interesting? How could we adopt this into our own projects? Is this something that is corporate friendly? Is this something that I could use in my future? And one of the things that I really love about it is you've got some really great people who are all communicating and all giving their perspective on these. But it's also a great way just to see tons of projects, like real projects, one after the other. And that's something that I don't know if I really had a lot of when I was learning, was those examples that I could reflect on and be like, oh, this is what a compliance course looks like. This is what like something that might be accepted as like a branching scenario in a corporate environment looks like. So a lot of people who come in, they may just want to be kind of like a wallflower, just kind of like turn their camera off and just kind of observe. But it gives them that chance to see all these different examples and kind of reflect on that creativity. So I'm hoping that it gives to the community something.
Absolutely. I know that when I was checking it out, I saw an example of an escape room that I thought was really interesting. The one that was kind of like the more like Halloween-y theme with like the skeletons. You had to go in to find the key and to be able to do it was really well done. It was.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we sometimes come up against in our discussions is like, hey, is this something that would work like on a job? Is this something that would work in an office? Because these prompts can be taken several different ways. Sometimes you have really creative, I consider them artists, that will come on and they will create a project, but they'll do it just to push the boundaries of what their software can do. Not necessarily building it with like a specific position or a job in mind. They'll just do it because they're passionate about it. It's their hobby, it's their drive. And that's also something that's really cool, is you can see what are the capabilities of your software? What are the capabilities? What is my software capable of doing if I really push it to the edge? And these people are doing that. So you see some really innovative stuff. Like, for instance, one of the things for one of my Goodwill trainings that I just developed was to help people who are grading clothing see the small problems that might be in clothing and determine, is it worth keeping and selling, or should you recycle it? So I integrated in this like hover over trigger that would allow you to magnify a specific area. And that required like a little bit of JavaScript, and that required like a sense of integrating in all these different functions of Storyline. I got that idea from seeing some of these projects that worked, and then reaching out to the people who build them and be like, hey, how did you build this? Can you help me? And like, if it's something about the L&D community, they are always happy to help you and just kind of like help you grow and help you develop something, because they're super passionate about it.
I love it. Yes, by far the learning and development community, the instructional design community, like nicest people ever.
Yeah.
Like genuinely they are. Well, that's super cool, Russell. I will 100% also include that link in the show notes as well for people to go and to check out those, and you can actually go and check out the one that I saw, because there's been a lot of, I will say, I have seen a lot of types of escape room-esque related things that are just kind of like blah. And it's like, I've gotten to the point whenever someone's just like, escape room, that's like instant hatred. And I'm like, no,
I get
please
that.
no. Like, no. But this was really well done. And hats off to that person who created that one for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Russell, I think that's really all I have for you so far, but I just love to be able to ask the final question of where can people go to learn more about you and all the awesome things that you're up to right now?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on, man. This has been a blast. Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Russell Sweep, like sweeping the floor. And then I also have my website. It's russellsweep.com. If you want to check out some of the stuff I've worked on, or if you want to, listen to the podcast, that's where the show notes are. So you can always check out like, hey, what's going on? What's the next episode? Who are the guests? That's a great place to do it too. And then recently I started launching a side business where I am attending conferences and developing promotional materials for these conferences. So I'm going over, I'm filming, I'm editing so that I can create a commercial for them. And I'm also starting to do speaker reels. So if you're if you got something that you're on stage and you want someone to cover that for you and develop a cool commercial for you so that you can submit it to other conferences, reach out to me. Maybe we can make that happen.
Well, I'll probably be reaching out to you. Honestly, that actually sounds like a really great idea. So
Nice.
Anyway, awesome. Russell, once again, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man. It was great. And thank you for being so open, by the way, because I know that talking about a new position, especially with leadership, is definitely a challenging thing to do. So really appreciate your honesty and all the words of wisdom that you gave to us today.
Thanks for having me, Luke. This was a blast.
Russell, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Folks, if you have not yet connected with him, whether listening to the podcast or following him on LinkedIn or checking out his website, absolutely, you need to be able to do so. Send him a message. Tell him that I sent you and that I said hi. I'm sure he would love to be able to hear from you. Of course, if you liked this podcast episode, as always, go give it a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. I am not picky. Google, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, some other platform that I don't know about yet that I probably really should because I am a podcaster, but you know about it. Feel free to give it a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. And of course, if you have any other ideas about the show, you want to be able to share along and pass along with me, feel free, connect with me over on LinkedIn, once again by email. All my contact information is down below inside of the show notes. But hey folks, that is all I have for you so far today. Stay nerdy out there. I'll talk to you next time.